This is a Knilling Perfection peg. These are internally geared violin pegs. So what we're going to do here is we're going to show how to install these. Now, because these are threaded and they do screw into the peg box, these threads are very thin, they're very fine. They don't really dig into the peg box so much as just hold on to it. The direction matters. These screw in the direction that the peg loosens. So as we turn the peg downward toward the body of the violin to loosen, that is the direction that these pegs will screw in. You can't put it into the wrong side. If you do, the only way you'll be able to screw it in is by turning it upward in the direction of tightening the peg. Now, the only specialist tool that you'll need for this installation is this. This is a peg reamer. It's got cutting blades on it and is used to open up the peg holes. This has a number of blades along its length. They're very small blades, so you probably couldn't cut your finger off with this if you tried, but they are very sharp. So if you're not careful, you can cut out a little piece of your finger and it'll bleed and it'll hurt and you'll cry like a little girl. You may be able to find something like this at a hardware store and just use that, but you're better off buying one that's designed for violin pegs. It probably won't be much or any more expensive than just a regular wood reamer, so why take the chance? The first thing you want to do is take your violin and loosen up all the strings, just tight enough to vibrate. One possibility is to just take all the strings off while we're doing this operation. The downside of that is that when you take all the strings off, the bridge will come off and you'll lose the tension that is holding the sound post in place. Now, most of the time the violin has enough tension there already that the sound post will be held in place. But it's possible that if you take all the strings off and remove the bridge, the sound post will fall. Because the position is very sensitive, it can take some time to get it positioned right again. Moving it just a millimeter in any direction can completely change the sound of the violin. What we're going to do is we're going to not remove all the strings at the same time, so we're always going to have some tension and always keep the sound post standing. So we'll go ahead and just completely remove the G string. The other three strings still have some tension on them, so they're still holding the bridge in place. Now, because this is a fairly new violin, the peg holes have not been worn down. So what we'll do first is we'll take one of these pegs, make sure to double check that it threads the right way, and we're going to screw it in just to check. Remember, the body of the peg does not turn. So if you just turn the head will turn without moving the rest of the body. You want to hold the body while we screw it in. Just get it to where it's hard to move with your finger. There's still several threads showing outside of the peg box. We're going to want to be able to screw this in until it is flush with the peg box there. So obviously we need to open the hole up a little bit. So before we do that, we'll take this back out. This reamer has angled blades, so what happens is it cuts when you turn it clockwise. When you turn it counterclockwise, it does not cut. Start off by putting this in the peg hole there. Now we want to hold pressure on this so that it cuts, but you don't want to jam it in with all your force. So put light pressure in, and see I'm using just enough inward pressure that it cuts. Gently pull it out. Now we've cut away a little more of the wood from the peg box. So we'll take the peg again and we'll see if it screws in any further. Now that went in a little further this time, but there's still a couple threads holding out, so we probably want to cut about that much again. Ream out a little more. Now remember, this is tapered, so you always put the reamer in from the side that the peg will go in. So now we'll try again. So that's in about where it needs to be. You'll notice we have a bit of the peg sticking out on this side. That doesn't hurt anything, so you can just go with that, but it does look a little odd, and you can hit your knuckle on it when you're playing in a low position. So we're going to want to cut that off. We're going to take ourselves a pencil and mark right where the edge is, and then go ahead and take it out. So what we're going to want to do now is cut down the length of that peg. And you'll want to take a saw of some kind with very small teeth on the blade. A hacksaw works great. Very carefully cut it. Try to make the cut as square and as clean as you can. So now we've cut this peg down to length. So take just a regular old file and use that to make sure the cut is square and flat. And we're also going to take these very square corners and round it off instead of square. So now we've rounded off the end a little bit. We'll get some coarse sandpaper. This is 100 grit. And we'll just use that to smooth it down a little bit. We'll go another step with some finer sandpaper. This is 150 grit. Now at this point you could install it. This is an aesthetic judgment. You can decide how much effort you want to spend on fiddling with the end, because that's mostly going to affect how it looks on the edge of the peg box. One thing you can try, these are sanding sponges or sanding blocks. You can buy them at any hardware store or Walmart in the painting section. This one is also 150 grit. And we can use this to smooth and polish a little bit more. We can go another step and use a finer sponge. This one's 320 grit. And at this point, we're no longer sanding or smoothing, we're polishing. Rub a bunch of the dust off it, and you got a fairly nice smooth end. So this is an alternative to doing the finer sandpaper and the leather polishing that no one suggests. Use a sanding sponge. So now we've got our peg hole reamed out to the right size for this peg. We've got the peg itself cut down to length and the end polished so that it'll look like we want it to. All that's left now is putting it in. Now the instructions suggest using a small drop of polyurethane glue on the threads when you screw it in. This will make it grip the peg box better and not slip. That is not, in my experience, necessary. I've never used it and I've never had the peg slip. I've heard from a number of other people who've installed them without using the glue and have had no problems with it either. So don't worry over much about gluing it in. Some people are very nervous about that, thinking about gluing pegs into their peg box makes it permanent. It is not a permanent glue and they can still be removed, but I don't think the glue is necessary and you can probably get by just fine without it. Say we'll take this moistened Q-tip and just rub it inside the hole a little bit. You can skip this step if you want. It doesn't seem to make a huge difference, but it does help, maybe help the peg grab the wood a little bit better. So now we just take our peg and screw it in. Remember, we're screwing this in the direction of loosening the string. And we're going to take it down to where it's firmly in. Remember, you're not turning the head, you're turning the body of the peg. Don't use a set of pliers or anything to try and put it in really hard. Just use your hand and your finger and put it in so that it's firmly in place. Don't bear down and try and squeeze it that last quarter turn. Just get it solidly in place. So we take our G string that we took off and we just thread it in. Now remember, we have to go up under the D string, just like threading a regular peg. You just stick it in the hole and start turning. Now remember, the same rules applies with any other peg. You want this wrapped tight and you want it wrapping over toward the side wall of the peg box, not wrapping over itself. And like the other strings, we're going to tighten this up just enough that it holds in place and has enough tension to vibrate. Make sure it's going into the groove in the nut. Make sure it's going over the bridge in the right place. Connect it into the tailpiece. So we've now put one peg on, and as you can see from looking at it, it's very hard to tell that it's any different than a regular peg. If you were 5 or 10 feet away, you'd never be able to see the difference. So with the G string taken care of, we move back to the next peg on the E string. Now the E string is special because on pretty much any violin you're going to have a fine tuner on the E string. The question becomes, do we keep using it? I don't think that you need to have that there with these pegs. But if you want to have it there, or if you think maybe it's necessary, then keep it. We just take our peg, make sure this is one of our treble side pegs. Should screw in this way. Use your fingernail to check. Now we just take this peg and do the same thing we did with that G string. It's wound as it should be. In the groove in the nut, proper spot on the bridge, take it into the tailpiece. So now we move on to the D string. You can see that the A string is actually bent over the peg of the D string. So there's two things we can do here. We can prop it up, or we can just go ahead and take them both off. That'll leave the E and the G string still there to hold the bridge on. So I'm going to prop it up. Take our fine tuner here, loosen the A string down, slip that tuner back up under there. Tighten it so that it holds in place. Now we can take our D string and remove it. There's the D replaced. Just the A to do up top, and then we're done. Let's pull it off. Now we have all four of them in. And now we can start bringing it up to pitch. Keep an eye on the bridge. As you tighten the strings, it might start to lean forward, so just gently pull it back when it does. And just bring it up to tune, and now they're installed.